Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Bills with Luke Scorzell. The world is full of stories that are waiting to be told. And as we've seen on this podcast, long-form audio is one of the best ways to tell those stories. Today's guest, Jordan A. Brown, has made the most of podcasting. He's interviewed over a dozen people and doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. Just after this, we'll get the inside scoop. Stay tuned and keep listening. I'm Luke Scorzell, and you're listening to Bills. Before we get into the interview, I'd first like to take a minute to thank patrons to the Bills Luke Scorzell podcast. Thank you to Zach for his amazing $30 per month donation, to Mike, Tiana, and Julie for their $15 per month donations, and to all of the other people who are helping out support the podcast. I greatly appreciate you all. So be sure to head over to patreon.com/billswithluke to become a supporter of the podcast today and to get your awesome, one-of-a-kind stickers. They are amazing. I have talked about them before on the podcast. People have made comments about how highly I speak of these stickers, but they are truly awesome, and I have a lot of them. So if you become a Patreon today, if you even just send me an email and ask for a sticker, I might just send you a few. So keep that in mind as you listen to the interview. And as you can notice, I am back on the show. It has been about 2 months since our last podcast episode, but in the meantime, I have chosen a college to go to. I'm going to the University of Southern California on a full ride scholarship, which I'm very excited about. It's closer to home than some of the other colleges that I was considering, and it has amazing broadcast journalism programs, which is definitely something that I want to do, as you can probably obviously tell. So look for future episodes that are in Los Angeles, and it will be super, super amazing. So yeah, and if you are here because you are listening to my speech at graduation and recommended my podcast, then I welcome you. And if you're just a new listener, or if you're an old listener, then we're going to have a great show today. So with that, let's get into the interview. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Jordan A. Brown, host of the Jordan A. Brown Show, to Bills with Luke Scorzell. Thanks for joining us, Jordan.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate you inviting me onto your show, and I'm excited to see what you're going to ask me.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a great conversation. I know we've had a conversation in the past. So let's start with some of the basics. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, man. All right, so where do I start? So I'll give you the short story. So basically, I am a person who's interested in many things. I was born in California, ended up moving to Florida for, about 14 years now. And I've been basically interested in a lot of things growing up. I was very interested in history. I can thank Indiana Jones and Harrison Ford for that. So shout out to them. Well, I guess they're the same person, but whatever. And basically, I fell in love with history as a young kid. And I love sports too. So I'm very passionate about sports, big San Diego Padres fan. So I know you're out in Southern California. I don't know what team you root for, but they have something about underdogs is, they're near and dear to my heart. And so going through high school, I was kind of figuring out what I really wanted to do. And I wanted to do sports management. So I'm really good at building teams. I'm really good at figuring out the best place for a person to be to make an organization run effectively. And so I decided to pursue sports management. I was really into the scouting of baseball. I wanted to work in a front office. So I decided to pursue that, but I didn't really know where I wanted to go. And out here in Tampa, Florida, everybody wants to go to USF, UF, University of Florida, and FSU, Florida State. And for those of you who don't know what USF is the University of South Florida. And I was adamant. I'm like, I am not going to USF. I am not staying in Tampa. I want to get out of here. It is hot in Florida. And I ended up going to DC with my dad my senior year of high school. And as soon as I stepped out of the train station at Union Station in DC, and just picture this. So you have the cars just going by, the taxis. It's a probably like I would say probably 30 degrees in late November. You could see the Capitol Christmas tree in the background, and I could smell the cold, the air and just the bustle, and I could feel the bustle of the city. And I'm like, this is where I need to be. I need to be in Washington, D.C. And I had liked politics for a long time. I've been interested, and that's partly through the history part. So I ended up, as soon as we get to the hotel, I'm like researching what colleges are here that, aren't like 50 plus grand or more, a year. And I really decided to go to George Mason. I found George Mason outside of Fairfax, Virginia. And I really fell in love with George Mason, and never actually went to the campus at that time. Up until that time, fell in love with DC. Mm-hmm. Came back, ended up applying to George Mason. Was super excited to go. Met some great people at orientation, and we were planning out the sophomore, junior, senior year, all that good stuff. And came back, crunched some numbers, and found out that I would be going into like 40 grand in debt for a sports management degree. Now, sports management's a very, very competitive industry. It's like, if you want to work for a Major League Baseball team, you like have to know someone, or you're working your face off for forever. And I have no problem with working my face off. I have a very strong work ethic. But the ROI didn't really work out. The numbers weren't adding up. So I decided to take a year off from school, and it was more of like, it was out of necessity rather than because it was too late for me to apply to the local school, University of South Florida. Because at that point, I'm like, okay, my delusions of grandeur of going off to some faraway place where I got brought back down to reality. And I took the year off. I worked a little bit. I went out to California. I did some business things here and there. Mm-hmm. Kind of trying to like find out what I really wanted out of life. Cause like, I don't know if you probably, you knew what you wanted to do. You wanted to go into broadcast journalism. But
yeah, I'm figuring
especially
out
after, yeah, exactly. Right. And it'll be like that too. Not to sound like an older brother or anything like that, but it takes, every step of the way it's a journey. Mm-hmm. But I didn't want to go to college after that year. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna work and I'm gonna figure this out. And I had a family friend, and they said, look, you're gonna go to school and just test it out, meet some friends, go to USF. You have Bright Futures, which is the scholarship program that pays for the full funding here in Florida. And I'm like, all right, fine, I'll go meet some people, I'll go learn. And it ended up being a great decision for me. I met a lot of great people. I basically was introduced into a lot of opportunities. My major completely switched. They said, hey, you have to pick a major. I'm like, oh man, what am I going to do? What was I good at in high school? And I'm like, history. So I ended up getting history and political science. And that was up until a year ago. Yeah, I graduated a year ago, and doing something totally different than history and political science. But I still use that mindset of, taking a larger problem, dissecting it into smaller parts, and then regurgitating out not regurgitating, but producing an analysis. So I'm still using some of the tools that I've learned, but yeah, man, it's been a journey. My life has been a journey for sure. I haven't even gotten to the half of it yet, but it's fun. It's a process. I'll be 24 in 10 days, but I'm excited for, hopefully I'll have 24 plus years to come after this.
Yeah, hopefully some more than that too. But
exactly.
well, we're glad to have you here today, and happy early birthday. So what are you doing now? You're obviously podcasting, which is, you say, kind of a big change from what you'd maybe expected to do. Are you still interested in sports management at all? Or?
Yes and no. So I don't think I'll ever pursue it, just because that ship has, I don't want to say that ship has sailed, but it's something you have to get into when you're relatively young, because there's, it's a simple supply and demand. There are so many people that want to work for, a Major League Baseball team, and even a minor league baseball team too, or NFL or any sport, pick any sport. And it's so tough to get in because it's, they have plenty of people who want to work for them, and basically you're working for, I mean, I have a family friend who knows someone who worked for the Red Sox and now works, I believe he works for the Dodgers. If not, he moved to the Pirates. Anyway, doesn't matter. He was working for free basically for 3 years. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how he supported himself. He might have had family. Unfortunately, I don't have that luxury. I do have family, but I don't have the financial luxury to do something like that. Mm-hmm. But I definitely come at sports from a sports management mindset. I'm very good at I love the transactions basically. The season itself it's not boring to me, but I like to build the team in the off season, and project where they're going to go. The season itself is kind of an unfolding of that. So I find both parts kind of interesting, but I like the background, background more.
Yeah. So. Well, it's a good skill to have still. And you mentioned putting people in places that they need to be to perform to their fullest potential. And that's something that you need in a business too, if you're going into business. And now you have your podcast, and that's, I don't know if you're, so, and that moves us on to the next topic. What do you see your podcast becoming? And then, I don't know, let's get started with, what is your podcast?
Okay, absolutely. Well, first, let me actually, for my, any of my listeners who end up listening to this, they'll have heard this story so many times, but I want to go into the background of why I even started the podcast to begin with. So I had always thought about starting something to get my voice out there. My family is so funny because every time I come home and I'm ready to talk about something, an idea that I learned, I'm always about learning new things. And they're like, you need to find someone to talk to or find a way to talk to this stuff, because they're like, we love you, Jordan, but man, we need to, you have to talk to someone about this stuff, and I figured, okay, well, what better way than to get myself out there either through a YouTube channel or a podcast or something like that. And I had always listened to not podcasts per se, but I would plug my aux cord into my phone and listen to a lecture on YouTube. Mm-hmm. As I'm driving to work or to and from work. And so that's kind of what sparked the idea of a podcast. But I had surgery about 2 or 3 weeks before I actually had you on my show, before I actually started the actual podcast. And I was lying in bed and I'm like, this is ridiculous. I can't not do anything. I was being bored to death. And I saw a video from this guy named Gary Vaynerchuk. And for those of you who don't know, he's this very big social media and business oriented entrepreneur style guy. And he's always talking about, the different steps to take in order to start something for yourself. Just do it. And he has a call-in show called Ask Gary V. And there was this girl who was about 22. She was 22 at the time. Taylor Clark, just wanted to give her a little quick shout out. She called in and she's like, I want to do this, this, and this, and this, but I'm 22 and I don't really know if I should start, da, 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 da. And he's like, just do it, just start. And then after that interview that I listened, I'm like, oh my God, she's 1 year younger than I am. Why can't I do something? And that's when the ideas started flowing. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do something. What am I going to start? Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to start a podcast. All right, what is it going to be about? What am I interested in? Okay, well, let me, it was kind of the aftermath of Donald Trump's first year in office. So it was kind of interesting to see all the political things. And, I was getting on Twitter and I'm like, all right, what, I'm going to start something about politics and, have conversations and try to bridge some gaps and, just have overall conversations with people, the conversation that you and I had previously. And so it started off as that, mm-hmm. and it ended up evolving because for the first several episodes, first of all, my podcast originally was named the Egora. So that's Egora. And the reason I named it that is because the Agora with an A was a place in an ancient Greek city-state. For any of you history buffs out there, it was a place in an ancient Greek city-state where people would come together and discuss ideas. They would discuss politics. They would discuss philosophy, religion. They would come together for, the market to sell goods. They would have sporting events. It was basically like the precursor to the Roman Forum or the plaza in any modern city. So it's basically a meeting place for people to talk and discuss and come together. And so I wanted to create the electronic agora. So I called it the Egora, basically a place where I could bring people on and have discussions, or even do monologues and just rant about something and then have feedback. Mm-hmm. So it was political in nature, and I started it. I had my friend who ran for state Senate in Florida. I had him on, and then I had you. And I had a couple more people. I had some people in the pro-life movement. I had a youth pastor. So it was a great experience, but I was worried. I was worried that I was going to be pigeonholed into politics for my entire podcasting career if I continued on that path. And for me, like I said before, I'm interested in so many different things, and I didn't want to be known as just another political commentator. I mean, we have like people like Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin. Those are the only two I can think of off the top of my head.
Jordan
Rush
Peterson.
Limbaugh and what?
Jordan Peterson. Not
a little
quite,
bit.
But...
Yeah, a little bit. I'll talk about him in a second, but yeah, I just didn't want to be known as another political commentator. And then right at that time, I was, going through Twitter and everything like that. And this was right around the time, like right after the aftermath of the whole Parkland shooting in Florida. And then so you had the whole gun debate rolling, and people were just, and as a student of history, politics has been nasty ever since humans gathered together, to create the first civilization. It's like social media. It's so funny. There's something that Gary Vaynerchuk said. He said, social media hasn't made us worse. It's exposed us for who we are. So it's just basically allowed for people who never would have talked to one another to reach out and have conversations. Now, those conversations can go one of two ways. They can either be a positive conversation or they can be a negative. Well, I guess there's a third. It can be kind of a middle ground where you learn something and I learn something and we go back our separate ways. But so Twitter was just nasty. Like there were people like the whole CNN town hall with the Marco Rubio and Dana Loesch, and it was just nasty. And I'm like, and that coupled with me not wanting to pigeonhole myself into politics, I was like, all right, I don't really know where I would go, but I was trying to find a way out of politics or pigeonholing myself into politics. Mm-hmm. And I ended up having Taylor on, the girl from the Gary Vaynerchuk interview, and she and I were talking, and she was like, we had a conversation after my podcast, or our conversation after we recorded, and I recorded that too and uploaded it. And she was saying, why not change your name? Your show name, and because we were talking about stories, and I'm really interested in the stories of people, and that's what I was really interested in to begin with you and with my friend who ran for Senate and a couple other people. I was more interested in the backstories behind these people and the ideas that they had to share. Kind of interestingly enough, like your website, The Edge of Ideas. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's it. It's the stories of individual people. Doesn't matter what background they have, what industry they're from. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to expand it as it goes. And since then, I've had my last political person was Brian Nichols of the Brian Nichols Show, which he's an awesome guy. If you ever get a chance to interview him, or if you ever want to, definitely have him on. Yeah. Oh, he's scheduled? Awesome. Yeah, he's a blast.
Next Sunday, I think.
Perfect. He's a blast. And I'm not opposed to having political people on my show in the future. It's just I didn't want to pigeonhole myself into that.
Yeah.
So I've had him on. I've had an MMA fighter. I've had one of my friends who does fashion and styling consulting. I've had this Monday, I'm releasing an interview conversation with Tony Mosey. So he's a rhyming book reviewer. So he makes book reviews in a traditional hip hop style. And he's the only one doing it. So I'm very excited to release that one. So, and I have a couple more on tap. But I had one with Dr. Chris Zano about, he's a chiropractor who has an amazing story. I was completely thrown off guard. But that'll be out in a couple of weeks. But anyway, I was just more excited, and I wanted to hear about the individual stories. And another thing, so I used to, when I was doing the politics side, I would do so much research, and I felt like I would bog down the interview. And so I decided in the new format, I was going to know the person's name. I was going to know what they did, and I was going to know, a little bit of their social media stuff. But from then on, the conversation was going to take any way, shape, or form that we took it. It was basically a conversation. And that's how I've been, like, I've had crazy stories on my, like, I don't know if you've heard the one with the Jonathan Fisher, the guy from Steel Umbrella Company, but that story was insane. I mean, we talked for an hour and a half recorded, then we talked for another like an hour and a half after that unrecorded. We were just talking about life, like the crazy, like, you don't know who you're going to meet on through something like podcasting or YouTube or anything that you do. So it's just been a journey, and I'm excited to see where it's going to go. I have no idea where it's going to go. I'm just going to keep doing my thing, and we'll see what happens. Opportunities will open themselves up to me. If that's the case.
Well, I mean, definitely it's been, I mean, you've had quite the journey, and the whole conversation aspect of podcasting is, I think one of the most important aspects of what we need in our society. It's interesting. And hitting at the conversation aspect a little bit harder, that is one of the most important things I think in our society, is the fact that we're lacking conversations. I was receiving a scholarship today at a local Jewish organization, and one of the guys asked me why I was interested in journalism and where I thought that I fit in. And what I told him, and kind of one of the themes I guess that I have in doing this, is that you watch TV and you get the 30-second clips of people arguing back and forth about who knows what, honestly, and there's no consensus, there's nothing learned. Zero, or I guess the negative way out, is taken of the three ways that you proposed of a conversation going. And no one really learns anything. They just get a little like hot and bothered over the argument, and then they go back and they listen to it again. And one of the things that your podcast and that my podcast, I think, are providing are platforms where we can like sit down with someone and really get to know their story and tell that story to our viewers. So you have this super unique story, and you decided to move away from from politics, and that's like totally okay. And that's probably actually pretty important, because people need to realize that politics aren't the most important thing in all of life. And that's probably the next question that I want to get to, is like, what do you see as the importance of politics in our lives? Like, should it be the sole focus that a lot of us take and like pour our life and soul into, or should we take like this more broad approach to the world around us and really like explore this curiosity for the people and things around us?
I think that it's more of the second. I think that we lose, like, so if we think of politics in the modern, conception of what it is, where it's, especially in American politics, where it's like Democrat versus Republican, and we disagree on, these are the issues, these are the hot button issues, and I think this way about it and you think this way about it. I think that's the wrong way to go about politics. And it's through the stories that I've kind of learned that. And the reason I say that is because I think that we lose sight of who we actually are and who the other person is. So like we become detached from like let's say we're watching the news or something like that. And you hear these stories and it's just like, oh, I'm glad that's not me, or something like that. Or if you see like, oh man, like let's say you're super conservative and you see something that pisses you off on a left-wing station, and you're like, oh man, look at all those people, or you label people. Like and as humans, it's natural, we like to put people into boxes because it's easier for us to see the world that way. But I think that we need to, I feel like we really need to step back and view other people as people. And I'm not trying to say that in like this new agey kind of, like let's all sing Kumbaya together. Like I'm gonna be honest, there are some bad people out there. But I feel like the sense of community has been lost. Like, I don't know about like where you live in your area, but in my area, my old neighborhood, we used to have block parties, and we used to actually get to know the neighbors and, have a sense of community. And it wasn't even about safety. It was more of like, just like we got to know who each other, who each other was. And in my current neighborhood, my apartment, I barely know the neighbors, and partially that's my fault because I haven't introduced myself. But I feel like what politics is really how do I want to say this? I think politics is the interaction between people who live in a society. Now, obviously that goes down to different levels. So we have local politics or even community politics. So like you have your little, let's say it's a homeowners association, or your cul-de-sac. Let's say you have block meetings and things like that. That goes all the way up to the federal level. And then also, obviously the international level. But I think that we really need to get back to understanding who we are, and then we have to be able to understand how other people are as well, and actually have conversations and not just go back and forth. I know, like, because I've been on Twitter recently, and I was scrolling through, and I still follow some political people, and I was just looking, and I'm like, man, this is just like, especially with the whole like there are a couple I don't even want to bring them up, but there were some things that were going on Twitter recently. And then, like you have like the whole Trump North Korea summit, and it's just like he said, she said, and I'm like, man, this is why I don't like politics in what the traditional sense is, what we think of as politics. So I think the key here, and coming down to my point, is that we need to redefine what politics actually is. And it's not just going to the voting booth every 4 years. It's not campaigning for a candidate every 4 years or every 2 years. It's not even just, holding up a sign or tweeting some snarky tweet to quote, own the libs or whatever. It's actually getting to know the neighbors around you. It's actually getting involved in the community. And it doesn't even have to be at a large scale. It can be something small. It can be just having conversations with your neighbors. It can be, volunteering at a local food kitchen. It can be getting involved with your local church or whatever religion you are. But I think that we need to go back to becoming connected, because as we urbanize, we become more and more detached from one another. We're kind of like little like chess pieces. And I think we really need to get back to seeing each other as human beings, and, actually having conversations. And I think that's what will improve the dialogue in this country, especially in the United States. I think it'll improve the dialogue if we don't view people across the aisle as like the other, and we all, I mean, it sounds cheesy, but like, we all view each other as Americans, and further down the line, as Californians or Floridians, or as, and so on and so forth. So I hope that kind of answered that question.
No, yeah, definitely.
It was a roundabout way.
Well, what it gets to, I think, is the problem, and I say it's a problem, and I think that you'd probably agree with me, that we've kind of defined like politics as a way of life. So rather than like debating every once in a while, or like having a thoughtful conversation on like, what do you think about with your neighbor, and you disagree with them, and then going back to your like regular life and enjoying your kids, enjoying watching sports, enjoying going to the beach and doing whatever with that same person you disagree with, we've instead labeled ourselves and defined ourselves, I think, solely by our politics. So like, I'm a conservative and I can't associate with you evil liberals, or I'm a liberal and I'm not going to associate with that crazy racist homophobic Republican over there. Like, we've take in each other's beliefs and use them to either like qualify them as a person that we want to associate with, or disqualify them. And it seems like kind of what you're getting at is there used to be this world, and hopefully there is a world for us in the future, where instead of defining each other by our politics, we just go about our normal life, and maybe we disagree with someone on something, but it doesn't mean that they want to like kill us or murder us, or that we shouldn't associate with them. Like, we need to work on building the sense of community back up, that yeah, like we're all Americans and we all share this common ground. And I think like that's kind of the importance that maybe you're getting at, and that I think I'm getting at too, hopefully, with some of these interviews. I mean, a lot of my show, so your show seems to be showing that like people are like okay, that you can associate with different people and you don't need to be worried about what they believe necessarily. And mine, I think, is more about like the ideas, like exposing a lot of people to different ideas and saying like, look, you don't have to be so like afraid or so angry about a certain idea. You can just sit and listen to it, and if you truly disagree with it, then come up with a reason why. And if you don't disagree with it, then wow, you have a new idea that you can latch onto. So yeah, it's interesting to try to find the commonalities and just like almost tell people to relax and just go with the flow and meet new people and stuff like that.
Exactly. And I don't want to say that like there's this like idealistic, like I don't want, I'm not naive. I don't believe that we're all ever going to get along 100%, but I think that focusing more on our commonalities will lessen the amount of rhetoric that we're seeing, you know, in the news, on Twitter, on Facebook, in civil discussions. Because like you said, well, and we talked about this in our conversation before, it goes back to this whole identity politics thing. Yeah. Defining yourself, and it's, to be frank, it is perfectly natural for people to categorize themselves into boxes. I mean, that's how we define our world. Like, okay, this is green, this is blue, this is red, like, or else it would just be kind of a muddied mess. But when you start defining people by characteristics that they can't change, that's when you start, like, for example, if I identified myself, and I solely based my existence on being a white male, I can't change that. So like, to me, I don't know why that's anything to be proud of. Like, I was born like that. Like, I can't change it. So I think that, I don't want to say judge people on their, it's not even judging. It's like you said, having conversations with people and being able to say, okay, look, let's agree to disagree, but I can learn something from you and you can learn something from me. And I'm not looking to, like, I feel like people go into conversations these days to change the other person's mind. And I think that's the wrong way to go about it, because think about it. Like, if you were to put yourself in the other person's shoes, would you change your mind if someone came and like with the goal? No. Mm-hmm. So we should be going into conversations having, like, maybe I could learn something from this person, or maybe, and that's the thing, because if you go in with that mindset, they're going to be more willing to learn something from you. And then that might make the world just a little bit of a better place. My thing, my motto really is to leave the world a little bit better than I found it. Mm-hmm. And, cause like I said, I'm not idealistic. I know that we're not going to sit there and sing Kumbaya. And I don't think it even starts at the American level. I think it starts at the local community level by, like, it on the grassroots, saying hi to your neighbor, and it permeates out from there. So I just think that, we can sit here and we can blame the news for, and like, I'm going to be honest, I don't think the news is doing us a service by basically, saying, all right, and in tonight's news, this is what President Donald Trump did, or, and on Fox News, all right, this is what the liberal media did. It's like, that's not helping anything. I mean, it's good for ratings, but it doesn't help people one bit. So I think that we should stop looking at institutions to necessarily solve these problems and start looking within, mm-hmm. And around, really, within and around. to solve these things. So
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think a lot of the time when you actually end up changing your mind, it's not because someone went in, like you said, with the goal of like, okay, I have a sword and a gun and I'm going to change this person's mind and they're going to start to think like me. Like normally it's you go into a conversation kind of unexpectedly. You sit down and you talk pretty much like this and a lot of the other interviews that both of us have done. And you just talk, and then all of a sudden the other person brings up this one thing that you're like, wow, that's interesting, like insightful, and then you start kind of asking more questions about it, or maybe it like challenges your own beliefs, and so you're curious about it. One of the conversations that I kind of always remember is with Arpit Chaturvedi, the editor-in-chief of the Cornell Policy Review. He talked about systems thinking and how you can look at how the different systems interact, and it was something like I'd never really heard of before, and I didn't expect to hear from him. Well, I did, but I didn't like expect it to have this impact on me. And I was like, wow, like that's really interesting. But I don't think he went in with a goal like, okay, this guy's terrible for not knowing how to use systems thinking to solve problems. Like he was just explaining himself and what he does, and that had an impact on me. I wrote a college essay on it, and yeah, and it's kind of had an impact on how I see the world. So to go back to what you're saying, there are a lot of conversations that we have that are like feisty and you want to change the person's mind and they want to change yours. But in the end, those aren't the conversations that do change your mind. So on that point, what are some of the conversations that you've actually had on your show, either the Agora or the Jordan A. Brown show, that have really stayed with you and had a conversation, and don't feel any pressure to say our conversation, because I know it probably changed your entire existence.
Well, so I didn't with your conversation. I felt like it was kind of the gateway to the conversations, because it was the first one that wasn't necessarily solely political, because we talked about psychology and we talked about like health and wellness. Mm-hmm. So I kind of like piqued my interest in some of the other things. But as far as my most memorable conversation right now, I have to say the Jonathan Fisher one with a steel umbrella. I lost track of time, to be honest with you. I lost track of time. Like I was like, oh my God, we've been talking for an hour and a half, and next thing you know, and I'm like, oh, let's stop this now. And and then we ended up talking, like I said, we ended up talking for a couple hours later. It was so, like, honestly, and he and I even talked about this. He and I felt like we had known each other for years, but we had just met. Like, well, I mean, we'd reached out to one another to schedule the podcast, but that was our first time actually talking with one another. I would say that one, hands down, just because he got so into his backstory, and it was such a powerful backstory that I was just like completely blown away, and just his passion for art. And he wants to create a school. His end goal is to create a school I would say a school that fosters the creative process. So whether it's art, or any like traditional art. So like when you think of like painting, sculpting, digital art, video, photography, metal art, which is his medium. So like welding and things like that, podcasting, videography, all of these things. Like it's just awesome that he wants to foster that type of environment for people to come in and basically share their stories too. Because that's how he shares his stories. He shares it through his art. I would say another one was Dr. Chris Sano. I don't want to give too much away yet, because that's going to be coming out in a couple weeks. But I was just completely blown away by where he was in life and where he is now. And basically all I can say from that interview, I can come back and take away from, is there's zero excuses, like none. You don't have any, because this guy was on the verge of death and now he's thriving. So it's insane to see some of these hear some of these stories, and really get at the heart of who these people are. Mikey Conlon was awesome. I'm trying to think of who else. Brian Nichols was awesome. That was insane. Just having a conversation about politics, in a good way, in a constructive way. Yours was the same. I can't even remember all the guests that I've had, because it's all of them have just been awesome. But those are the ones that have really kind of like, I got off the recording and I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to sleep tonight, because that was like, I'm hyped, I'm pumped.
Yeah,
but
it's kind of awesome to know that you share like that kind of feeling when you get off a conversation. And for me, it's I go out onto the stairwell over my family room, and my mom's usually down there, and I say, "Wow, that was a good conversation," or something like that. So yeah, it's it's a good feeling. I know how you feel.
exactly. And one person, so going back to what you were saying about, not having, not going in with the intent to change someone's mind when you're having a conversation. One person that does this very well, and this is why he has such a great following, is Dr. Jordan Peterson. And there was actually a video on this. I believe it was Charisma on Command, Charlie from Charisma on Command, which is someone that I would like to bring on my show at some point. He's very interesting. He talks about the art of rhetoric and, about posture and confidence and things like that. So he's a really interesting story. But I believe it was Charisma on Command that did a video breakdown of Peterson. But what Peterson does is he puts himself in the other person's shoe. He's like, I know it's hard, or he said, I know you might not think this way, but, or, I know it's hard to, I can't really put the words right exactly how he does it, because he's that great at rhetoric. But he actually cares, and he's not trying to push his viewpoint. He actually listens. And I think that's the key to a conversation, is being able to sit back and just listen. Because like, there's that saying, like, we have 2 ears and 2 eyes, but only 1 mouth for a reason. And here I am going on and talking, but
no, you're being interviewed. It's fine.
He's just an interesting character, and he's a guy who actually inspired me in a lot of things. He actually, to get personal, he actually inspired me to, back to faith, back to Christianity, because of his biblical series. He actually showed the importance and why it is important. And his age old saying, like, you have to clean your room. And it's interesting because it's like, it's basically a metaphor, and it's also an actual literal, like, hey, go clean your room type of thing. But it's also like, make sure your house is in order before you go tell anybody else or go help anyone else's. It's kind of like the idea of, like, you can't pour from an empty cup type of thing. It's, you have to focus on, get yourself right, or at least as best as you can, before you can go out and help others, and go out and talk to others. So I find his work really interesting. I'm actually reading his book, 12 Rules for Life. Very fascinating book. I'm only on chapter 1, the lobster one, which I did not know how close we were to lobsters, like, as far as our emotions and our basically our structure of how we perceive dominance, like the dominance hierarchy. I'm probably speaking like gibberish to your listeners, but it's really interesting stuff. I highly recommend that book. I highly recommend looking at Dr. Jordan Peterson. And another person who's really good with conversations is Joe Rogan, who's a great, like, when you think podcasting, you think of him. And he can talk to anybody, but he can also talk for hours. So sometimes his podcast can get really long, but he has like a wide range of guests. Another person I'd say is Dan Carlin. He had him on his show. Dan Carlin's he was a historian, but he started his career as a journalist. And he did radio for a while, and he moved into podcasting. But that man can make any idea interesting. Like, he talks for his podcast, his hardcore history podcasts, they're like 6 hours long, and he dives into a topic. But it's always good to be able to have conversations with people. And I think that, well, one, we don't encourage that in schools, I think. And this is, you just graduated from a public high school, correct?
Yeah. And yeah, a lot of it's, I guess the most discussion you get is in English class. And that's kind of one of the things I'm looking forward to in college, is that I'll hopefully be able to, like, speak up to professors or talk to students about things. So that's like for me, my podcast is one of the best ways that I know to learn, because it's like engaging with someone else's mind, I guess, or like their ideas, and they throw an idea at you and you throw your own idea back at them, or maybe their idea modified a little bit. But that's like a totally different style of learning than just reading out of a textbook. But yeah, so public high school, found my own way to learn, I guess. But you know, you learn different things. Not
Absolutely,
just in the textbook.
100%. I wish one thing that they would teach, and one thing I'm actually really interested now in learning, is the art of rhetoric. Just basically learning how to build an argument, craft an argument, and make it persuasive. And so that's one thing that because I do tutoring on the side. I also do some digital marketing, social media marketing for local businesses, but it's all about crafting the argument, and it's about marketing and selling. But like, people say like, oh, I'm not a good seller, or I'm not a good marketer, but we all are. I mean, we do that every day. Like when you go to do a college application, like you're selling yourself, you're marketing yourself out there. When you go to a job interview, when you go on a date, when you just in general, like people like can tell within several seconds if they're like, yep, this is going to be a good conversation, or no, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Like it's so fascinating to me, the human mind, and just like psychology is something that really interests me as well. That's one thing that drew me to Dr. Peterson. And I know you're really fascinated by psychology. And
yeah, it got me into my website. Originally, I was kind of interested in like some of the psychological secrets behind happiness. Actually, one of the most impactful it's not just the most impactful TED Talk, but one of the most impactful talks that I've ever heard was from it's called The Happy Secret to Better Work. I don't know if you've seen it. It's one of the most popular TED Talks, but what he talks about in it is that, and I don't know, this is maybe a little bit off topic of what we were just talking about, but so he got me interested in kind of how the brain works and how we can like be more successful based on our psychology. So traditionally, he says that the formula that we make for success and happiness is, first we'll have success and then we'll have happiness. But the problem with that is it's like a dog chasing a piece of meat on the treadmill. Like if you get that visual, like he's not getting anywhere. It's always just a foot ahead of him, and he just needs a little bit more. He needs to go a little faster. But he says reverse the formula. First, be happy in the moment, and then you'll actually be more successful. So out of that, what I started to do was make these gratitude journals. And this has kind of been my, like, I don't know, my big personal thing lately is writing down 3 things every day that I'm grateful for. And the research that he did, I believe it was with Harvard University, demonstrated that after about 23 days of writing those down, the people actually performed better at their jobs. They were more optimistic about their lives. So yeah, like that originally got me totally into like this whole psychology thing. And lately it's been a huge moving factor between like getting my life in order, I guess. It's been like literally the most crazy year of my life this last year, not just with colleges and stuff, but some of the like personal stuff going on. But just refocusing on some of the positive aspects in your life makes honestly like a huge difference, and not just like how you view the world, but like the work you're doing or the conversations you're having, or just like being out and about. And also like religion has been a big part of that too. I'd like to say I'm a devoted Christian. Obviously I'm not perfect, no one is, but yeah, I like to read my Bible and do stuff like that. So just finding like bits of positivity throughout your life and purpose, I guess that's pretty much totally off topic, but
no, not at all, because I'm actually going to segue into something that I know you were probably going to ask me about. Well, first, because you mentioned the TED Talk, but you also mentioned, finding what your gratitude, or what you're grateful for rather, and your happiness, and finding those moments. But it's also about finding that why. And there's a TED Talk and a book by Simon Sinek. It's probably the most powerful one that I've seen. It's the Start With Why. And he used it in a way of like why companies should, focus on with branding their why they exist, and then going out to how they embody that why, and then what they actually do as a part of that how. But for individual people, you have to find out like what you're here for on earth, and that could be a number of different things. But I feel like finding that purpose drives you so much more than if you were just wandering around, because I've been in both situations before, and I'm gonna be honest with you, wandering around with like, oh, I'm just a kind of a sack of meat walking the earth, and it's like, what's the point? It's tough to find those happy moments. It's tough to find those joyous moments. But if you know, like, okay, this is why I'm here and this is what I'm striving towards, it makes the present moments so much easier to take if they're tough, and if they're happy and joyous, you relish them more, because it's like, this is part of my journey, rather than I'm just wandering around, and then when my time comes and I die. It's like, this is a journey, this is a process. And that's at the heart of the podcast too, both yours and mine. Like, there's a reason why we started that, and that's what makes people interested in our stories, or in our podcasts, and in what we have to say, is because we convey that so often. Because if we just convey what we do, like, oh, hey, I'm talking about politics, or I'm talking about this, it's like, there's so many. Why choose you? Why go to why listen to yours? Or people have conversations all the day. Why should I listen to the Jordan A. Brown show? It's, so if we convey that why, not just in what we do, but also in how we live our lives, I think we'll be a lot happier, and we'll find more purpose in our life. So,
yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know, there's the whole philosophy of nihilism from Nietzsche, and I guess it's really easy sometimes, whoever you are, to just kind of like think, okay, literally nothing matters. Like, I could not exist, and the world would be like plugging along without me. And I think that's kind of one of the problems that you get when you focus too much on national politics, as like we were talking earlier about how that a lot of people are making that like the sole defining factor of their life. But if you define your life based on something that can function without you, then I don't like, it's really easy to fall into that like nothing matters trap. But when you start to define your life by the micro things around you, by your family, by our podcasts, by the work that you're doing on an everyday basis, then you're like, okay, yeah, there's this whole world outside of me that will always be functioning, and it will probably always be miserable, because like what you said, you're a student of history. Politics has always been miserable. Alexander Hamilton was killed by Aaron Burr, two huge politicians back in the day. I really don't think that that's much better than what we have now. But the fact is, like, everything's always going to be bad. It's always going to exist, whether we exist or not. But if we find like the small things around us that we have this massive impact on, and everyone can find that, like, everyone has a big impact on their family, in a positive or in a negative way, but in some way the people around you would be impacted and would be devastated if you were gone or you weren't there, and their lives would be totally different. Like, another thing that I think about a lot is the fact, so as a Christian, like, I attribute a lot of meaning to just small events, and you have to like just wonder, like, okay, I'm stuck behind a slow car. Like, is the slow car stopping me from an accident down the road, or stopping me from something else? And so I'll just go with the flow and like relax a little bit and let it be. Or just one conversation that you have with someone in line could spark an idea in your mind. Or the fact that winter break of my junior year, I didn't have finals after winter break. I had them before winter break, so I was bored, and then it snowed in, and then I was like, okay, I need something to do. So I started listening to the Ben Shapiro show, and then I was like, hey, I can do this myself. So I started a podcast. But it all started because someone made the dumb decision to move finals before winter break. But without that, I would not be anywhere close to where I am today, because my podcast has been a huge factor in getting me there. So there's a lot of meaning and a lot of significance to even the small events around us, I guess, is what the point I'm trying to make is.
100% agree with you. Just in this last year, I mean, like, there's a reason even before that, there's a reason I didn't go to George Mason. There's a reason I went to USF. There's a reason I went at that time. Hell, there's a reason I had the surgery when I did. I was so close to signing up for the Air Force. I was in the process of all last year trying to become an Air Force officer. That didn't work out, but I was going to enlist. And the surgery basically put everything on hold. And I don't want to say it disqualified me, but at that point I'm like, okay, well, I knew this is going to be a headache to do. And it allowed me to reevaluate my life. It started the podcast, and then it led me off into other things. So like, yeah, exactly. And then, even the tragic thing. So I was actually in I would say a pretty bad car accident, in April, about 2 months ago. Exactly. And, life was going well up until that point, and then you had, that thing. And it basically, I took, I was obviously upset about it at the time. And, still am to some extent, but I am taking it as a learning experience, because it's like, one, don't get so comfortable, because you never know when life's going to throw you a curveball, and you have to be ready. You have to be able to stand firm when that storm comes. Number one. And number two, in adversity, that's when you see what you're made of. Mm-hmm. And number three, in times of adversity, you find out who's there for you. So you can find that close group, whether it's your family, whether it's your friends, whether it's someone else, maybe it's a stranger, who knows? I mean, there are so many people who, like, I've met in just like the randomest situations. I don't even know if that's a word, randomest. I don't know, whatever. In the most random situations. And it's like that person was there for some shape or form, some reason. And like, I was in there at that exact moment. Like there's, it's just so fascinating. And I think that's why I like these stories so much, because you never know who's going to change your life, and you never know whose life you're going to change. Yeah. Like you said, if you focus on the small things that you actually have some control over, then you, like you said, you'll find meaning in life. But yeah, I 100% agree with you that there's a reason that you meet certain people. There's a reason that events happen. And that's definitely become, because for the longest time I always would look at where I am and where I wanted to be. And I was so focused on where I want to be that I would miss what's going on right in front of me. And even there are times where I would look in the past and like, man, like I wish that time was still going on. But like, you have a limited amount of time on this earth. You have to make the most of it. Mm-hmm. If you want to start a podcast, start that podcast. If you want to start a YouTube channel, start that YouTube channel. If you want to go move to wherever as a young person, you don't really know what you want to do, find that out. Do trial and error. Don't get stuck into something just because someone tells you have to go do it. That's one thing that I've learned significantly, is that like, you have one life, you might as well make the most of it. Because for me personally, I don't want to be on my deathbed and look back and say, what if I had done this, or what if I had done that? Now you obviously have to balance it out with responsibility and finding happiness, because those two sometimes don't go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. But I think if you can find that happy medium, or at least get as close as possible, life becomes not only bearable, but it becomes exciting. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, definitely. And that's another insight with my famed gratitude journal. I was writing some stuff, my 3 gratefuls the other day, and I just looked back at those 3, and I looked back at the day before, and I noticed a trend that, like, these were events and opportunities that I had like taken advantage of and that I had made happen. So, like, for example, today I'll probably be thankful that I had this podcast interview. That's something that I made happen. I'll be thankful that I went to the Mountain Jewish community to receive my scholarship. Like, that's something I made happen by applying for that scholarship. there are so many things in our lives that, like, if we basically, like, if we take life passively, if we're just standing by, we're sitting on the escalator and letting it do what it pleases to us, and just finding like events, like, yeah, you can find some happiness here and there, but a lot of life is making things happen for yourself, and like making things happen that like either give you a better life or make you happy, like, and that you're glad you did. So I could have just sat at home today, I could have played Fortnite, I could have done whatever, and it would have been a fine day, I guess, but I wouldn't have had a conversation like this. Like, it's like your life, you have a certain amount of control over it, so why not like use all of the control that you have over that life?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, you have to go out and it's cliche, but you have to seize the day, and you have to make the most of it. You have to really go out and carve out a path, but it's a little bit of balance from there, because you also have to not be so consumed with carving out a path that you lose sight of what's actually in front of you. So it's a balancing act, but I'm definitely a fan of leaning more towards the carving out path, and then emotionally more of like accepting what happens and then carving from there. So I guess that's a kind of happy medium for those two.
Yeah, you got to find the in between. Coming on and into an hour, but or past an hour. What a great conversation. I don't know. I'm just really enjoying this. I'm like so glad to be back on the podcast. It's been a crazy few months, and finally like have almost nothing to do besides get ready for college. So this is super fun. But aside from that, what are your plans for the future? Do we get like a little sneak peek into your podcast? I know we can hear too much about the conversation that you have coming up in a few weeks, but what do you have in store for your audience?
So I just actually recorded one this morning. It's of a friend of mine. He was a former fraternity brother. Well, actually, I guess he's fraternity brother. And so he talks about his YouTube journey. So he's in the fledgling stages. He's still starting out, trying to find his journey. I have another friend who started a company. I have him coming on Thursday, and then I have another high school friend who's a rapper, and then I have a couple other ones that I plan on reaching out to, some big fish like a Charlie from Charisma on Command. So I'd like to reach out to him, see if he's interested in coming on. There are several people who I'm interested in bringing on, but I like sharing the stories of the average day person who's doing something interesting. So someone that you don't necessarily know about, doesn't really have a big following, but helping build their following up. As far as what I'd like to do with the podcast, I would like to. So I don't know if have you ever heard of this guy, Chris Gethard? He has a show called Beautiful Stories from Anonymous People. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I don't think so.
So his podcast, he's a comedian, and I don't know why I even forgot about him. He was very instrumental in the story aspect, but he basically has a call-in show where it's 1 hour, and he basically has people call. I mean, he has a whole team and everything like that, but he basically has guests call in, random guests. He doesn't know anything about them, and they basically just have a conversation. They talk, and it could be, and he can't hang up the phone for that whole hour. So like they could badger him with questions. They could just throw, yell obscenities at him. They could do whatever, but usually people have conversations, and some of those stories are just wild, 100%. So that kind of sparked my idea of perhaps adding a call-in show element to the Jordan A. Brown show, so I can get people, and that would obviously happen once I get a little bit of a bigger following, so I have people to actually call in. So that's kind of an idea that I've been floating around. I've also been floating around the idea of actually going out onto the streets and just asking people random questions, or asking people if they're interested in sharing, a quick snippet of their lives on the spot. So like through a video form. So I'm kind of mulling over these ideas, and I mentioned these briefly in my intro trailer podcast episode. Haven't really had the time to sit down and devise a strategy as to how I would do that. So for the time being, life's pretty crazy right now. I'm started doing the digital marketing in the morning, still doing tutoring at night. But as far as the podcast goes, still keeping that up. And I'm just excited. I never in a million years would I have thought that I would actually be doing this. Mm-hmm. I was always of the mindset, even just several years ago, where it's like, let me think about all these things I want to do and never actually execute. And for once I actually executed, and I'm never going to go back to the other old way of constantly just mulling over ideas and it's a matter of doing. You just have to do. So I'm very excited for the future. I have no idea where it's headed. I just know that stories and people and my curiosity and ideas are going to be at the heart of it all.
Yeah, you got to let it guide you. And one of the key parts, kind of what you just mentioned of like doing stuff. I don't know about you, but like when we line up interviews, I mean, that's kind of like somewhat of a risk. Like I'll ask people constantly, like, do you want to come on the show? Like, do you want to be interviewed by me? And a lot of them say no, but a lot of them also say yes. But like if you don't ask and you don't put yourself out there and you don't do and you don't take the opportunity, then you're kind of at a loss, I guess. But yeah, like amazing stuff that you're doing. All right. Well, with that, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Jordan.
Absolutely. I appreciate you giving me opportunity to talk and share my story. It's my first time ever being interviewed, so it's been a blast.
Heck yeah. You did a great job. And to everyone out there, be sure to go check out the Jordan A. Brown Show. I promise you, you will not regret it. Great stories, as we've talked about, and a great podcast from a truly amazing host. So be sure to go check it out, and we can find you on Twitter, right?
So Twitter and Instagram, it's both the J.A. Brown. It's the J.A. Brown. And then I believe on Facebook, it's the Jordan A. Brown. But honestly, I'm most active on Instagram through Instagram stories. I'm starting to get out more content. I posted a story asking my followers, or rather my friends and followers, what do you guys want more content from me? And overwhelmingly, they wanted yes. So that's what I'm going to do. We'll see what happens. So yes, Instagram's the best place, but Twitter is also probably, I say Twitter is a good place to DM me, but I have my DMs open on everything. I'm willing to talk to anybody. And if you guys have a story to share, or if you know someone who has a story to share and they want to get that out there and have a conversation, you know who to contact.
Yeah. Well, go ahead and, contact them. So thanks again. And that's it for today. And that's it for my interview with Jordan A. Brown, host of the Jordan A. Brown Show. A very excellent conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. And it is not going to be the last conversation that we have. We have a lot of good conversations coming up. I just interviewed Sarah Lee Whitson of Human Rights Watch. She has just a bevy of facts that you will find very interesting if you find the Middle East in that situation at all interesting, or any foreign policy, and you should, because there are very extreme human rights violations happening in that region at the moment. And so we go in depth in a lot of that. I'm also going to be talking with Brian Nichols, who you heard Jordan talk about in the interview as being very exciting and actually one of his favorite interviews that he's ever done. So we'll be talking with him. We'll be talking with Tom Brake, a British member of Parliament, and a few other interviews are in the works. So ultimately going to be a very exciting upcoming few weeks and summer for the Bills with Luke Scorzel podcast. So be sure to stay tuned. Again, thank you to Zach for his $30 donation. He just received his stickers and his book, special edition from the 2016 election, published by CNN. And also thank you to Mike and Julie and Tiana for their $15 per month donations. And to everyone else, greatly appreciated. Again, head over to patreon.com/billswithluke if you have not already, and become a supporter of the Patreon podcast. We treat you very well. If you're not already following us on Twitter, go head over to twitter.com/theedgeofideas and get all the latest updates from me there. You can find us on Facebook. We are all over the place. And actually now on Instagram since this conversation. Head on over to all of the social media outlets. Head on over to theedgeofideas.com/subscribe to get weekly updates when we have a new conversation out for you to listen to. Thanks again. I'm Luke Scorzel, and you're listening to Bills.